Hello and welcome to Founded, an airwave media podcast where we find the stories you missed in history class because the tea was hot before they dumped it into the harbor. I'm Tori Phantom, and joining me today is someone who once hosted a porch goose wedding, Gwenna Lathland.
Going back into the catalog for that one. Okay. Hi. Are we rioting today?
No.
Oh.
No. Soon, though. Soon, though. Very soon. I know I say that every episode, but I actually mean it this time because today we're going to find out what they're rioting about.
We get to the thing that causes the riot, but not the riot.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Are you ready for your pop quiz?
Yeah.
Okay. Who was the London agent for Pennsylvania?
Benjamin Franklin.
Yes. What was the 15th resolution out of the 24 that made the Sugar Act?
That was the super secret, hey, don't pay attention to me. We maybe could later do the stamp tax thing where we make you pay taxes for paper.
Yes. And lastly, what was Grenville's promise about that Stamp Act resolution?
You don't have to do the paper thing if you just find a way to give the money, but I'm not going to tell you how much or when it's due or how to get it to us. But you won't have to do it if you just find a way to pay me taxes. I mean, not taxes, money.
Yeah, go fund me this stuff. But how much do we owe you? Figure it out. I don't know. Taxes.
Big shrug. Big shrug emoji.
Right. Literally. Now, before we get to the revolutionary taxes that were imposed by Grenville, it's important to consider why he would have pursued the colonies for money in the first place. Because, yes, there was over a century of salutary neglect where the colonies were mostly self-governing through their colonial assemblies with permission from the crown, but they were mostly left to their own devices. The situation in the mother country, though, led them to looking across the ocean. Because the 7 Years' War had left England in 145 million pounds of debt, which is about 34 billion US dollars today. It's a lot of debt, right?
It's a lot of debt.
And the taxes and debt in England were so significant that around 40,000 people were sent to debtor's prison, which then triggered anti-tax riots by tens of thousands of people. However, these riots were regional. So the goal here was to ease the tax burden in the mother country to prevent a national uprising. So Grenville steps up to the plate and he's like, I got this. We'll share the burden with the colonies full of smugglers and things will be good.
Because they got plenty of money over there. Plus, look, guys, why did we spend so much of that on the 7 Years' War? We got all this new territory for them. Meanwhile, the colonists are like, we didn't want you to get, we were fine with what we had. You didn't have to get that. Why is it our problem?
Yeah, we literally fought in the war too, bud. Like,
you made us do money. That. But congrats, we have Ohio. This feels like your problem, not mine.
Right? But here's an interesting thing that I learned. The smugglers in New England alone were smuggling in around 1.5 million gallons of molasses each year, which should have brought in around 38,000 pounds in duties a year, around $9 million US dollars today. However,
just like, no.
Yeah, we're not doing it, man. That's no. But the easily paid off custom officials, they were only collecting around 2,000 pounds a year, around 468,000 US dollars today, which was less
Were
than
they getting paid anything? Dang, they didn't even have to try.
Right. Well, the amount that they brought in was less than a quarter of their yearly salaries as customs officers. So they were making enough through the bribes that they were only collecting around 500,000 US dollars today. And the smugglers, the merchants, smugglers were getting wealthier and skipping out on paying taxes. However, even the wealthiest colonists couldn't compare to the riches of the British aristocracy, right?
Yeah. It is and has for a good chunk of their history been an exorbitant amount of wealth in the United Kingdom.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like,
and yeah,
it hasn't always been a lot.
Right. But when Grenville set about imposing these new taxes on the colonists, starting with the American Duties Act, the Sugar Act, he expected a revenue of about 45,000 pounds, around 10.5 million US dollars today. But to make all these numbers make more sense, and everything I'm about to say, we're talking current US dollars, okay? I'm making it make more sense here. The mother country was collecting around $500,000 a year from the colonies before the Sugar Act. The colonies should have been paying $9 million a year before the Sugar Act. The Sugar Act was expected to bring in around $10.5 million a year, which is only $1.5 million more than what they were supposed to have been paying in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, it's still a tax increase, but like it wouldn't have felt as dramatic if they weren't actively smuggling around paying their actual due to
right
the mother country, to the crown.
on top of it all, I don't think it is the taxes themselves the colonists were mad about as much as this huge authoritarian overreach of like, hey, now you don't get to go to court with a jury of your peers, which is like, this was an English principle that had been established, right? Like now they could just seize your stuff. And if they seize your stuff, they get to profit. So now they have a reason to do that. Like it was so much deeper than just the tax itself.
Like, no, buddy. We moved over here so we could break the rules. What do you mean you're going to enforce the rules? This was not the arrangement.
Yeah, this isn't how things have always worked, right? Like the king.
Like, aren't you English people like real big on tradition? Traditionally, y'all left us alone so we could break all the rules.
Well, right, because you have to consider that the power from England, really, it came from the king. Like parliamental authority, it was kind of, the colonists were like, no, it's the king, right? Yeah. But then, Britain had its own revolution that I'm not getting into. That's your era, honestly. But there was that whole situation where like the parliament authority was really established to have that shared power with the king. And they would send over these orders to the royal governors, and the royal governors would tell the colonial assemblies, and then they would do what they wanted. Like, that's how it worked. That's how it had always worked. And now they're like, no, not anymore.
The king has decided the sky is green, governors. We understand. Hey, colonial congresses, this is what the king has decided. To which the colonial colonists went, okay.
Yeah. It was
it's blue.
Yeah. It was like a smile and nod situation. I'm sure that's what they said. Yeah. Yeah, I believe that. But when I set out to write this episode, I had this one question in mind that I wanted to answer, which was, how responsible was King G3 for the revolution? Because I always remember hearing in all of the history classes that he was this out of control tyrant, but that felt really reductive. But before I get to the answer I found, I want to share some fun facts that I found first.
Okay.
Because when King G3 was set to be coronated, like his coronation, they commissioned a special coach that wasn't ready in time for his coronation, but it is still used in every coronation since to this day. The gold state coach was made for King George III.
Okay.
And the other fun fact is that he is also behind Buckingham Palace. He had that built for his wife. And again, still in use today. So I think that's kind of a fun fact.
All right, nice. And again, just as a reminder for those listeners who could possibly have forgotten, when we talk about King George III, we are in fact talking about Queen Charlotte of Bridgerton fames that was based on, loosely based on the same George. Bridgerton was happening just post American Revolution, but over in England. So yeah, we are in fact George of Queen Charlotte's fame is the same George. Granted, that is a fictionalized version, and we are not talking about a fictionalized version.
We're talking about the real guy. But short answer to my question is that King G3 wasn't directly responsible for the revolution beginning as much, but he was way more responsible for perpetuating it and not letting it go. Like, he was like heels in the sand.
Well, I think in a lot of sort of representational governments, which Parliament is a representational government, there's always the previous administrations, and even in monarchs, a lot of the problems that filter down into becoming G3's problem started with G2, his dad. Or no, it was uncle, wasn't it?
I think it was his grandfather.
Was it his grandfather? Anyway, it started with the king before him. Yeah. And then those problems actually started before that. Like, almost no wars are started because one guy made one mistake. Generations of people made mistakes, and then there was a straw, and it broke the camel's back. And in our case, the straw was a kind of sweet stamp.
Yes, because the beginning of the revolution can be traced back to the Stamp Act, which had its roots in the Sugar Act that we made several episodes about. You should give them a listen when you get a chance if you haven't already. But in addition to the Stamp Act was also the Townshend Acts. Now, the Townshend Acts will come up at a later date, but Charles Townshend himself will come up today.
Okay. I went to Townshend Elementary.
Huh. I wonder if they were like,
Townshend,
we should name this elementary school after this guy that started the revolution.
You know, I live in Oklahoma. Maybe.
True. But before the Stamp Act passed, the colonists were petitioning and their London agents were scrambling. The same London agents who had a meeting with George Grenville in the spring of 1764 after the Sugar Act passed, trying to figure out an alternative to the Stamp Act that he slipped in to the Sugar Act as that possible future task. And he was like, yes, but we'll have a year to see if the colonies come up with other things. And the London agents were like, okay, what does that mean though? And he was like, I don't know, you know, like Grenville, the gaslighting goose. Right. Shrug emoji. Exactly. But Grenville, the gaslighting goose, told the agents that he'd have another meeting with them before the next session of Parliament, where he intended to get that Stamp Act passed if they tried to get the colonies on board with the stamps. And that's where our story begins today. It is February 1765. The colonists, colonial officials, and London agents for the colonies opposed the Stamp Act. And I brought up the London agent for Pennsylvania, Benjamin Franklin, for a reason. At the time of the Sugar Act, he believed a moderate tax was totally reasonable, especially when it was placed on luxuries, not necessities.
Well, and especially since they were smuggling way more than they were paying. Yeah. They were supposed to be paying $9 million. They sent about $500,000 back.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like we're not, yes, taxation without representation, big problem. But Ben Franklin's is like, or maybe just pay what you're supposed to pay.
Well, that's Benjamin Franklin is such a complicated fella. Like every time that I read more about him, every time that I go to bring him up, I'm like, he's like this walking contradiction for quite some time and absolutely unhinged all the time. Like he's an interesting one. But at the time, Franklin was out of touch with the colonial experience, and he was very proud of being a British subject. And you have to think, too, he's like that original rags to riches story. So he felt very, very privileged and fortunate. So he wanted to keep this place that he had. He wanted to continue to grow. And at one point, he had told a member of parliament that he wasn't worried about their tax plans because he knew they wouldn't overburden the colonies, because if they hurt the colonies, then the mother country would suffer too. Like he really believed that the British government wouldn't ever knowingly harm the colonies. And he wanted to help heal the divide, but he does end up making it worse on several occasions. Just throwing that out there. There's going to be many stories that come up where I'm like, Benjamin Franklin did this. What? Yeah. He was a great diplomat when it came to France much later in the story. But as the colonial agent, not so. Not his brightest time there.
Wasn't he the guy who wanted the turkey as the national bird?
Maybe? I'm going to have
I
to
think
look
he
into
wanted
that.
the turkey. Pretty sure, like, when it came down to all of that, like, unimportant symbolic fluff, he's like, you know what really represents us? Gobble, gobble.
Honestly. That he had started his career as a printer. And so when this idea of the Stamp Act came about, he was especially opposed to that one
It's
on
like,
a personal
hold
level.
up.
Yeah, he had said in a letter to a friend in Philadelphia, it will affect the printers more than anybody. And his other printing pals in Philadelphia sent him letters saying that the stamps would absolutely put them out of business. And so here we are. In February 1765, we have 4 agents meeting with Grenville in hopes of stopping the Stamp Act from coming. Now, 2 of the agents were members of Parliament and London agents for the colonies at the same time, which is a weird thing, but they loved collecting titles.
Right.
And then there was Benjamin Franklin and Jared Ingersoll, who I haven't given you his name before, but I have talked about him because he was one of the guys in the colonies that our buddy Gardner Tom was sending letters to for collecting data to write the Stamp Act, right? And Ingersoll, he did not respond nicely. He was kind of like, bro, like, this is a bad idea. This isn't going to work out how you want it to. But he wasn't actually a London agent. He was in London on private business, but because he was intimate with the colonial feelings, they were like, hey, man, get in this meeting.
Hey, can we pick your brain for a sec?
Right. And the reason that I actually named him today is because the reason we know what happened in that meeting is because he wrote a detailed account of it in a letter that is now an incredible primary source about what happened at that meeting. I have found such joy in reading primary documents recently. It's so fun.
So are you having to like slog through their handwriting, or have they been digitized and are now in more of like a type form?
There is a lot of historic societies where you can see the original document, but they have also typed it up.
They've also already translated it.
Yeah. The newspaper articles are a hit or miss, though. Sometimes you just got to read them as they were.
When I was in college, they were just starting the process of doing a lot of digitization of that. And so I am so happy for the people still studying history that they didn't have to slog through, because some of the original writings were in handwriting that was just not only are the characters already more difficult to read because of the flourishes and the styles at the time, but some of y'all's handwriting back in the day, bro, what the...
And let that hundreds a year old ink just spread.
Right. Just really, really make it super easy, and then not at all blurry clouds of ink anymore. So I'm so happy that y'all don't have to. We're breaking generational trauma. You don't have to read that old man's handwriting. Excellent. Continue on, thou historians.
It's fun to look at, though. I will say that.
It is.
Yeah. And in this letter that he wrote, he says that in this meeting, the agents are looking for compromise. They're not looking for no taxes. They're looking for the ability to self-tax. And they told Grenville that most colonies were on board to contribute to the debt issue and donate to London's wallet if they were asked to do so in the regular constitutional way, and that they wanted to come up with their own taxes to meet the need, which feels reasonable.
Yeah.
But Grenville is like, listen, I'm not trying to cause any problems. I'm just doing my job here, guys. And when you look at how things are doing here, and then you compare it to the way that I think things are going in the colonies, as I have never stepped foot there, the colonies should be paying something. And I don't see a better way than stamps. But if you have any better ideas, I'd be happy to hear them and like take that route instead. And the agents were like,
bye.
The agents, they were like, might we refer you to 5 minutes ago when we said let them tax themselves, bro? But Benjamin Franklin, he had an idea that wouldn't go the self-tax or stamp route. Franklin, his idea here was that Parliament should authorize paper money in the colonies with interest, so tax the money. It would still operate as a general tax, but it wouldn't be as unpleasant or burdensome as the people who had the most money would have to pay the most taxes. Seems reasonable, but Grenville is all, I really like stamps, though. And he rejected the idea.
Listen, honestly, again, the money tax actually makes good sense. In this scenario. They'd already taken the currency away with the Currency Act. So like they would just be giving it back. And this time you pay a little extra and you can have your money back, and then you don't have to worry about the British pounds.
Which
like
would
you can
also
just have
help
your Rhode
their
Island
economy.
dollar again.
Yeah,
right.
Their economy was absolutely failing after the 7 Years' War. Like this plan was solid. But Grenville really, 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 really liked his stamp idea.
Oh, there was a good idea in the government and the guy in charge went, nah.
I know, it's so shocking. And Grenville, after rejecting a good idea, he goes on to ask the agents if any of them could figure out how much each colony should pay, which is an absolutely bonkers question to ask the agents because he was the one with the means to gather this information. Like he was the one who had a way to gather the information necessary to make such a decision. He was the Secretary of the Treasury, and the Board of Trade literally existed to collect this data, whereas the colonies had no connection with each other outside of sharing a mother country and Samuel Adams' anger.
Which was by design, by the way. They didn't want the colonies working together because then they might get some ideas to, I don't know, have a revolution or rebel.
Yeah. And Grenville was basically asking the agents if they were able to do what he should have done, to pick a goal for the GoFundMe and decide how much each colony was responsible for fundraising. This was exactly what the agents had asked Grenville for a year prior at the first meeting, where Grenville basically shrug emojied. I don't know.
Wait, so hold up. In brief review, the agents were like, whoa, bro, if you need money, cool, talk to us. How much do you need? To which George said, some. Y'all figure out solutions and we'll discuss numbers. Okay, here are a series of solutions, George. How much do you need? Oh, I don't know. I was hoping you could tell me that.
Yeah. Great synopsis. Yeah. And the meeting where the agents had asked, what is the sum that we owe you? Right? That is the same one where Grenville had told the agents to get the colonies to agree to this mystery stamp act without knowing what it meant or how much it would cost, to which the colonial assemblies basically ignored the request because it would have kind of meant giving up the entire reason they existed. And at the same time, they said they would be happy to comply with requests made in a normal constitutional way. Like these things are just connected. The colonies were like, hey, we want to contribute. We love being British. And Grenville's like, but I like power and stamps. So you don't get my stamp of approval. See what I did there?
It's funnier when you explain it.
I know. But at the meeting in February 65, one of the parliament member / colonial agents says that letting the crown keep armies in the colonies while also paying officials in Britain with American money without letting them tax themselves would just serve to undermine the colonial assemblies and basically destroy the representation they have in their own homes. And Grenville, shock of all shock, shrugs. He's like,
shrugged emoji.
He's like, nah, that won't happen. They won't happen. But realistically, it would be inevitable because royal governors would have loved to not have to deal with the colonial assemblies who were paying them. But the agents knew that Grenville was obsessed with stamps and that there was little hope left by the end of this meeting. And even though Grenville wouldn't accept any of the ideas he said he was open to, he had some ideas of his own on how to make the stamps better. He thought that the colonies would be more accepting of the Stamp Act if the colonists could appoint the stamp masters and get a commission for it. So he asked the agents and other officials in the colonies for nominations for this lucrative position. And Benjamin Franklin rushed to get his friend elected as a stamp master, and Thomas Hutchinson over in Massachusetts got his brother-in-law, Andrew Oliver, appointed. This would not go well for either of them or any other stamp master. But more on that later. That's in August. So now we have Grenville not listening to ideas, that he said he wanted to hear, having his
Standard,
own and having his own ideas of, hey, why don't you guys come up with your own stamp collectors? This is a great idea. It wasn't. But shortly after this meeting, Benjamin Franklin sent a letter to a friend in the colonies saying that he couldn't stop the stamps, that it would be like, quote, hindering the setting of the sun. And then he moves on to quickly try to excuse it and soften the blow. He's like, it really isn't going to cost that much. And Americans could easily pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Quote, frugality and industry will go a great way towards indemnifying us. Idleness and pride tax with a heavier hand than kings and parliaments. If we can get rid of the former, we may easily bear the latter. Basically,
that man really said, just eat less avocado toast, bro.
It is so funny that you just said that, because the next thing here that I have written down in my own notes is basically he said, work more and stop buying iced coffee and an avocado toast in my
That's basically what he just said. Okay, yeah. So the poor and the middle class have been told to stop enjoying small moments of joy so we can pay the rich people to be even richer since the dawn of time.
Yeah. He said laziness and pride is a bigger problem than the government. So stop being lazy and proud, and then it'll be easier to submit to the government.
Stop drinking lattes and eating smeary vegetables on bread. Problem solved.
These millennials and their avocado toast.
All right.
Yeah. But even so, all of the colonial agents were still gearing up to try to fight against the Stamp Act in Parliament. And a few days after the meeting with the agents, Grenville goes to the House of Commons and he reminded them of the 15th resolution and how they had already approved it. But there was quite the debate. One 7-year war veteran, Colonel Isaac Barr, who fought in the American part of this war, was a huge supporter of the colonies, and he strongly recommended that if there had to be a tax, and he wished that there didn't need to be, that the colonies should have the liberty to raise the money in their own ways. And then a certain Charles Townshend, who would go on to anchor the colonies in his own way later on, he said, quote, and now will these Americans, children planted by our care, nourished up by our indulgence until they are grown to a degree of strength and opulence and protected by our arms, will they grudge to contribute their might to relieve us from the heavy weight of that burden which we lie under? So he's basically saying, like, hey, like, we gave them this. Their success is because of us. Are they really going to complain?
So what's interesting, what I heard there is by this point, war has not broken out. They're on the verge of it, and the Brits en masse do not realize how close they are to losing control of the colonies. A handful of the London agents seem to be getting a sense like, this isn't going to go the way you think it's going to go. But for the most part, most of Parliament and the Crown think we're cool. We got this. We're on lock, right? So what's interesting to hear them say is they have already begun the shift in language. It's not the British across the sea. It's not the colonies. They have started referring to them as the Americans.
Yes. Because they actually saw them as less than. So like calling them American was like, they're not even British. However, what's interesting is they had always had this fear over the prior century of the colonies wanting independence. They were so afraid that they would, because they were a cash cow. They didn't want to lose the colonies. And by their fear of losing the colonies, their continuation of trying to flex authority, they created a self-fulfilling prophecy.
You mean empires understand that most people do not want to be a part of the imperial march?
Yeah, it's shocking. But basically, yeah, that's what Charles Townshend was saying, right? He's like, hey, we took care of the colonies and they've grown to such strength because of us. They are protected by our arms. Is it really that big of a deal to ask them to contribute to this massive debt?
This has the same energy of, well, I took care of you and changed your diapers when you were a baby. Now it's your turn to take care of me. Why do you think I even had kids? Same energy.
Same energy, yeah. And our buddy Colonel Isaac Barr, veteran of the 7 Years' War, who fought in America, was not pleased with what Townsend just said. In fact, he was pretty mad about it. He said, "They were planted by your care?" Quote, "No, your oppressions planted them in America. They fled your tyranny to a then uncultivated and inhospitable country." And he continued saying, I'm paraphrasing this part because some of the way that they spoke is a little trickier to understand. He continued saying that they had endured horrible hardships with pleasure, with the principles of English liberty, compared to the suffering made by the hands of those who should have been their friends. They didn't grow because of your care. They grew because of your neglect. As soon as you started caring, you showed that care by sending people over to rule them, spy out their liberty, and misrepresent their actions and prey on them. But he wasn't done. He said, they're protected by your arms. They've nobly taken up arms in your defense and have earned their valor while giving all of its little savings to pay for you. And he wrapped all that up by saying, quote, "And believe me, remember I this day told you so, that the same spirit of freedom which actuated that people at first will accompany them still. But prudence forbids me to explain myself further. What I deliver are the genuine sentiments of my heart." So he's saying, hey, they had a spirit of freedom that led them to those colonies, and it's still with them.
Yeah, you didn't nurse them to this greatness. You ignored them, and they achieved greatness anyway.
Yeah. Like that is, I don't usually include so much of someone's speech, but I feel like that is so important and telling because this is someone who had fought in America. This is someone who is standing up for them and saying, you guys, you don't know what you're getting into here. Like that line, believe me, remember I this day told you so. Like, all right, go off.
Know who you're talking to. Know who you're talking about.
But yeah, anyway, the next day the resolutions passed in the House of Commons, which formed the basis for the Stamp Act.
That's a lot of words. Too bad I'm not reading them.
Yeah, too bad I'm not listening. Which is funny that you said that because Parliament was also fed up with the disrespect to the Americans for sending all those moderately worded petitions and letters that questioned their authority. So much so that they had decided to not even consider the petitions. They ruled against hearing any petition against the bill that they gave them a year to send in petition for.
All right, if you guys don't like this, just let us know. Oh, they didn't like it. Nuh-uh. Stop
this is
it.
Too much dislike. What do you mean you don't like it? You weren't supposed to not like it.
We told you to write letters. We didn't mean for you to write letters. Ugh.
We didn't want you to send them. There's no stamp on that envelope. Like
you were just supposed to do the thing where you wrote it all down and then you lit it on fire because it made you feel better.
Yeah, come on. You weren't even writing. But there was debate about this measure to not hear the petitions with another 7 Years' War vet, General Conway, who didn't fight in America, but he still cared, right? General Conway reminded the rest of Parliament that a year before they postponed the Stamp Act for a year to give the colonies time to send the messages and share their objections. Quote, "Shall we shut our ears against that information that we allowed sufficient time to reach us?" He basically said, how can we know what's going on in the colonies if we aren't going to listen to the colonists? How will we know the possible consequences that could come from this tax being imposed? But that didn't matter either. By March 22nd, the Stamp Act was a law. And by this point, the only people in England who seemed to have any concern about the Stamp Act were the merchants, who were afraid of the boycotts and the financial implications that they would face. And it turns out they had reason to be, because as we know, right across the ocean, Samuel Adams is rallying support for non-importation. And the colonists are figuring out how to manufacture their own goods to the point that they even stopped eating lamb so that they would have wool to fashion their own garments. Like, they were so serious about it. And they're like, no, we're done. We can do this all on our own. we just have to talk to each other, because there was no communication between these colonies. Like, there was this Frenchman who had traveled to the colonies at one point, and he had said that without the British overrule, that the colonies would be constantly at war with each other, which is shocking when you really consider how they were able to so quickly unite against the crown, when prior to this they were constantly arguing over the borders.
Bickering with each other.
Yeah, their colonial borders. They had these jealousies of each other. Like, they did not like each other. And the funniest thing to me about the way that the colonies were, they weren't even happy in their own colonies, right? Like the western and the eastern part of the colonies would be against each other, and they were constantly suing each other over the smallest things. Like, that's just, they were so angry at each other, and they were like,
"He touched my river. Nuh-uh, it's my river."
Yeah. And I think that's an important part to consider here as well, is that while the colonies to this point really didn't communicate with each other, right? They did love being English, but we have to consider the reason why they loved being Englishmen. And that is because this salutary neglect gave them the freedom to be as successful as they were. It gave them the freedom to build all that they were building. And so to now have this happening, and even the people who were standing up for them, who are saying, why aren't we reading their petitions? Why aren't we caring about what's happening there? They're just being ignored. And now they're saying, and now we're going to bring in all of these new regulations, all of these new laws. We are going to impose all these taxes. And the colonists are like, so we're going to lose everything.
Well, it's not just that. It's all of the limitations that prevented the success being found in the British Isles, in Great Britain, in the UK. They came here to the Americas. They found all this success. They set up smithies and shoemakers and merchants who own many boats. All of that was only possible because of the salutary neglect, because they weren't competing with guilds that had been in existence since 6-digit centuries, since the 300s. Like, they were in completely fresh territory. So if Britain comes sweeping in with all of those things to make them even more British instead of the British colonies they'd been set up as, all of that success was going to be, suddenly they're going to have to join the guilds, because there were still guild laws in the UK at the time. Suddenly they're going to be competing with all of these things that were not supposed to be competition, because there was an entire ocean between them. Yeah. All of these reform changes are going to make this exactly the thing that would have prevented their success in the first place.
And to top it off, right? Like, the colonists, they all own land. Like, the wealth disparity between the wealthiest and the poorest in the colonies was way less than what it was in Britain, where the aristocracy, they had peasants to yield that over, right? There wasn't that, because they had an abundance of land. Anyone could make it. Like, that's where that idea comes from. And so they're going, well, if they're going to come in here and they're going to start taking our stuff, if they tax our land, like, it provides that context to what these protests that, like, Samuel Adams was writing, like, oh, if they're going to tax this, if they're going to take this, why wouldn't they just take my land? And land was equated with freedom at the time, because in this dependency economy, having land meant that you were not as dependent. If you had to be dependent at all, it gave you a right to vote. It gave you so much more. Property was more important than money at this time. And they're watching Britain just come in, and they're like, yeah, but we're going to take it. We're going to take everything. And that's why they were saying no taxation without representation, because they had been taxing themselves all of this time. And Britain had taxes on the colonies. This wasn't new. Taxes were not new. It was the way they were taxing them.
Well, and they weren't, again, they didn't like the Stamp Act because they felt the Stamp Act would be really bad. It wasn't that they were like, no, we don't want to give you money. It was more that in the earliest days, they're like, we don't want to give you money via stamps. We will still help pay these taxes, but let us figure out how we can. How much money do you need? When do you need it by? We're willing to do the work to pay you because we want to be good British men. We want to be good British citizens. So let us help you.
But
the Stamp Act will kill us.
And we have our own colonial assemblies. Let us figure out what tax will work best for our people, for our constituents, because we know the situation here in this colony.
It wasn't revolution. It was asking to self-govern, which they were already allowed to do. It became revolution when George Grenville was like, stamps!
I love these things. This is so fun. I love
stamps. Stamps.
You get a stamp.
Shimmy.
You get a stamp. Everyone gets a stamp. Yeah, because the taxes were new. Like Britain had regulated all of the trade through the Navigation Acts, which I haven't gotten much into, but generally speaking, like they had a lot of rules about the way they could import and export, what they were allowed to actually manufacture. But it worked out for the colonies because they had all of their raw materials that like that's what they were good at making. Whereas because they had all this land, right? Whereas over in Britain, it was the opposite, right? Because they had a huge population, way less land, but they were like leading the Industrial Revolution, like the beginnings of that. So it made sense to send over raw materials and then import the manufactured goods. They were fine with that because they felt like, you know, it's one concession we could make because this is working out well for us. And so then suddenly to have them come in and be like, we want you to pay our debt. And we totally want to hear your petitions. We have ruled against hearing your petitions. I wonder what'll happen next. You'll find out on next week's Founded when we talk about the colonial response to hearing about the Stamp Act. Things get out of hand pretty quickly.
So we get a riot?
If not next episode, maybe the one after. We kind of have to set the scene there.
But I'm gonna get a party hat for the riot, I swear.
Please do. Please do. We need some party hats happening. But thank you for listening to Founded. I hope you found something interesting. Drop an email at foundedhistory@gmail.com and let me know what you want to find out next. And remember, we don't see history repeat itself, but we do continue to hear the echoes. Founded is a part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like Bibliophage and Childproof and a bunch of other podcasts that don't feature Gwenna and I, like the American Revolution podcast. We'll see you next time. Well, you'll see us.